It was supposed to be an ordinary day in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun was shining, and the sound of distant engines hummed in the background. A black man, casually dressed and minding his own business, strolled into a local parking lot to grab a drink from a nearby convenience store. But what should have been a peaceful moment quickly turned tense. From across the lot, a group of bikers sat huddled by their motorcycles, throwing glances his way. Their voices, loud and mocking, started to carry over. As he walked by, the taunts became impossible to ignore. "Lost, buddy." One of them sneered, his tone dripping with hostility. The man paused but didn't respond. He wasn't one to entertain trouble, but his silence seemed to fuel their arrogance. They stood up, closing in on him, their demeanor aggressive. What they didn't know was that the man they were targeting wasn't just any ordinary passerby. Beneath the calm exterior was a Navy SEAL, a highly trained elite operative who had faced situations far more dangerous than a few bullies in leather jackets. As tension filled the air, you could feel the confrontation brewing. Would he reveal his identity? Or would he let his actions speak louder than words? Stay tuned to see how this encounter takes an unforgettable turn. The man stood still, his calm expression never faltering as the bikers closed in. Their laughter echoed through the lot, a mix of mockery and misplaced confidence. One of them, taller and bulkier than the rest, stepped forward and shoved him lightly on the shoulder. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" He jeered, his friends chuckling behind him. The man's eyes briefly scanned the group. He didn't flinch, didn't react, just stood there with a calm that seemed almost unnatural. To anyone watching, it might have looked like fear, but in reality, he was assessing, calculating every move, every escape route, and every possible outcome. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught him how to read a room, even when it was outside under the open sky. But the bikers weren't looking for subtlety. To them, his silence was weakness, and weakness was something they couldn't resist exploiting. "What are you doing here, huh? This isn't your kind of place." Another one sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Still, the man didn't respond. His calm demeanor only seemed to frustrate them further. The leader of the group, now visibly irritated, stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "You don't belong here. Maybe we need to teach you a lesson." The air grew heavier with tension as the man's quiet strength remained unshaken. Something was about to give. The bikers circled closer, their presence overwhelming and their taunts growing louder. To them, this was just another moment to assert their dominance, another opportunity to intimidate someone they assumed wouldn't fight back. They couldn't have been more wrong. The man's calmness wasn't passivity, it was restraint. Every part of him was prepared, trained to act with precision and control. But here, in the middle of a parking lot, he wasn't looking for a fight. He was weighing his. The leader of the bikers leaned in closer, his face now only inches away from the man's. His voice was low but menacing as he said, "You've got two options, pal. Walk out of here humiliated, or we make you regret showing up at all." The group erupted in laughter, their confidence bolstered by their numbers. But the man didn't budge. His steady gaze met the leader's, and for a moment, the biker hesitated. There was something unsettling about his calmness, something that didn't quite fit the story they had written in their heads about who he was. Yet, pride wouldn't let the leader back down. "Hey, you scared or something? Say something." One of the bikers shouted, trying to provoke a reaction. Still, the man remained silent. He wasn't scared, he was waiting. Years of discipline had taught him that the moment you lose control is the moment you lose everything. The group began to close the circle around him, their taunts becoming more aggressive. One of them reached out, shoving him hard enough to make him take a step back. That was when the man's body shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't an obvious move, but for anyone trained to notice, it was a signal. His stance was no longer passive, it was prepared. The onlookers could feel the shift in the air. Something big was about to happen, and nobody could look away. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the sound of a distant siren briefly pierced the air, fading quickly as it sped past the lot. For a moment, the bikers glanced at each other, wondering if someone had called the police. But when nothing happened, their focus returned to the man in the center of their circle. The leader smirked, trying to mask the flicker of doubt that crossed his face. "You're real quiet. That's not gonna help you much when this gets ugly," he said, cracking his knuckles. But before he could take another step, the man finally spoke. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone pause. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away from this," he said, his words clear and deliberate. The bikers froze for half a second before erupting in laughter. "One chance?" The leader sneered. "You're outnumbered. You think you're the one calling the shots here?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, almost like he was listening to something beyond the noise of the bikers and the murmurs of the growing crowd. That's when it happened. From behind the group, another figure emerged. Someone dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with the same calm, measured confidence. It wasn't just one Navy SEAL, there were two, and the bikers were about to realize they'd made a massive mistake. The leader of the bikers turned to see the second man stepping into view, his steps steady and deliberate. Confusion flashed across his face, quickly replaced by annoyance. "What, you called backup? You think two of you are enough against all of us?" He scoffed, but there was a subtle crack in his confidence now. The second man, just as composed as the first, didn't respond to the taunts. Instead, he stood beside his friend, his presence commanding without a word. The crowd of onlookers, now larger, fell completely silent, sensing something big was about to unfold. The leader, feeling the pressure, lunged forward, reaching to grab the first man by his collar. But before he could touch him, the man moved with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, he deflected the grab, twisted the biker's arm, and had him on the ground in seconds. It wasn't flashy, just efficient. The group froze, stunned by how quickly their leader had been taken down. But when one of them tried to step in, the second man intercepted, blocking him effortlessly. What followed wasn't a brawl, but a masterclass in control. The two men didn't fight aggressively. They neutralized the bikers with precision, disarming their aggression without causing real harm. By the time it was over, the bikers were either on the ground or backing away, realizing they were hopelessly outmatched. The leader, clutching his arm, looked up at the man who had warned him earlier. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice shaking. The man looked down at him and said calmly, "I'm someone who knows when to show mercy. You'd be wise to learn the same." As the bikers scrambled to their feet and fled, the two men exchanged a glance, a quiet understanding passing between them. But just as the crowd began to disperse, one of the onlookers approached. She was the woman who had been holding her phone earlier. "You didn't just stop them. You could have destroyed them. But you didn't," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Why?" The man paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Because real strength isn't about showing power. It's about knowing when not to use it." As the two men walked away, leaving the parking lot quiet again, the crowd watched them disappear into the distance, still buzzing with the realization of what they had just witnessed. No one would forget that day, or the lesson it carried. As the bikers disappeared into the distance, the parking lot gradually returned to its quiet state. The onlookers who had gathered began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the incredible encounter they had just witnessed. For many, it wasn't just the skill and control of the two men that left an impression. It was the way they handled the situation without unnecessary violence, proving that strength isn't about brute force. The woman who had spoken earlier lingered for a moment, watching the two men walk away. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their story, but she didn't need to ask. Their actions had spoken louder than any explanation ever could. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, the second man turned to his friend and broke the silence. "Think they'll learn from this?" he asked, a hint of a smile in his voice. The first man shrugged lightly. "That's up to them. We did our part." They both knew this wasn't about proving anything. It was about standing up in the right way at the right time. As they walked into the distance, their